everyone. I would first like to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to be part of a very interesting and relevant event. So WRI India is a global research organization, and we work in many countries, Indonesia, China, and US. So I'm based on the climate team, and we work on climate action plans and building capacity of city leaders to look at climate change holistically and how to integrate it within different sectors like transport, urban planning. So today I'll be taking you through I won't be focusing entirely on finance, which I leave the other two speakers to, but I'll be giving you a broad overview of how India can decarbonize the transport sector and what are some of the key strategies. And we'll be going through that through a modeling exercise that WRI has done. So this is coming to the global context. How does different countries globally look at transport within their global commitments? So you might all know of the Paris Agreement. So within the Paris Agreement, all the countries are requested to submit nationally determined contributions, which are mitigation and adaptation strategies. So in 2015, out of 165 such NDCs, although 76% acknowledged transport as an important source for emissions, only 8% had clear targets. So the translation of those strategies into targets was missing. And you can also see a majority of those plans only covered passenger transport and very little covered freight. So urban freight, like light commercial vehicles and heavy commercial vehicles, were not featured a lot in these NDCs. And even non-motorized transport was not a part of many of the NDCs. And similarly, so there are you must have heard of the avoid, shift, and improve framework. So avoiding is basically reducing the need for public transport in the first place, like avoiding the use of private transport, and maybe through demand management, like parking policies and having a fee for parking. And then shifting is moving towards alternative fuels like electricity and CNG. And improving the energy efficiency of transport modes. So we saw that a majority of the NDCs only focused on shifting towards electrification and CNG, and also improving the fuel efficiency. But very few of them, only like 6%, focused on transport demand management, such as parking. So this shows a clear bias towards technological interventions and less focus on addressing the source and reducing the demand for transportation. So coming to India's in the national perspective, so transport contributes to 10% of total greenhouse gas emissions in India, and also 10% of the total energy consumption. And majority of this energy consumption comes from freight transport, particularly trucks, heavy-duty trucks. And also this energy is, 92% comes from petrol and diesel. That's still the case right now. And although, FAME, subsidies like FAME and other schemes have progressed, positively over the last few years, even now only 1% of total energy consumption is from electricity. So there is still a need to, bridge this gap and shift away from fossil fuels. And you can again see here that trucks contribute the highest to greenhouse gas emissions. So recently India, I don't know how many of you followed COP27. So India submitted its long-term low emission development strategy, so LEDS. So within that, what the country is aiming for is developing an integrated, efficient and inclusive low carbon transport system. And these are the 5 pillars that the country has said, like 5 main strategies that India is planning to adopt until 2050. So first is improving fuel efficiency and reducing the import of energy and increasing India's energy security. And the second is electrification across all modes, with focus on domestic battery manufacturing. Thinking about the waste aspect, how do you recycle batteries, which is something that many countries are not focusing on, and also looking at expanding charging infrastructure. And next, shifting demand away from private transport to public transport, and also looking at alternative fuels, like in the short term, looking at blended ethanol. We had some speakers in the previous session speak about that, and biodiesel and hydrogen in the long term, right? So these are the 5 main pillars that India is focusing on. But these strategies are not accompanied by any targets as such. These are just very broad strategies. So this is, we did this analysis using an energy policy simulator tool. So basically what that tool does is, you have multiple policy variables, so you enter the tool and the user can choose different policy variables. Like, for example, within transport, we have the sales mandate for EV, so you can choose whether by 2050, 30% of new vehicles should be EVs, or whether 50% should be EV. So you can modify that input variable. And then you can choose like having an electric vehicle subsidy, choosing a value for that. Then you can also look at a mode shift. So how much percent, let's say 10% of private vehicles are shifting to buses. So that value also you can input in the tool. And so it looks at all these different aspects, and along with that, this tool also looks at energy related components. So along with electrification, are you also decarbonizing energy? Are you also reducing the demand and moving towards renewables basically? Because we all know electric vehicles don't have tailpipe emissions, but the life cycle emissions, if electricity doesn't come from renewables, it's not really sustainable, right? The electricity should not come from fossil fuels. So this is what the tool does. So as per the business as usual scenario, so in business as usual, we're assuming that the existing policies that India is already implementing continues, and we're also taking into account the average growth in energy demand from transport. So we see that for transport, the energy demand can grow by 7% each year. So every year it increases by 7%. So if you see the red, the red graph, the major CO2 emissions comes from trucks again, followed by two-wheelers, which is cars and SUVs, which is the dark green bar. So these are some of the assumptions. So for example, in this scenario, so business as usual, if India does not take any ambitious targets, it will not be able to achieve its FAME target. So under FAME, they want to have 30% new fleets should be electric by 2030. But as per this thing, it will achieve it only around 2050. So if you see by 2050, freight like passenger LDVs, 35% will be electric. And if you see, for example, three-wheelers, 38% can be electric. So basically, it's not, the business as usual scenario does not paint a very pretty picture in terms of India achieving its electrification goals. And in terms of fuel efficiency, so currently India has some fuel efficiency standards for four-wheelers, but there are no such standards for two-wheelers, three-wheelers, and also freight. So that area is not focused. So there is no improvement in fuel efficiency for two-wheelers and three-wheelers. This is the assumption that we are taking for the business as usual scenario. And we also assume that it can achieve 72% of energy from renewables by 2050. So these are some of the assumptions in this scenario. So and also we also looked at how the passenger travel demand will increase and how the freight demand will increase. So the passenger demand, mainly the demand for buses, if you can see the light blue graph, the demand for bus will increase by 364% from 2020 to 2050. So this demand, this shows that cities should meet this demand through better bus infrastructure and shifting towards low carbon buses, electric or CNG buses. So you should harness this fact that the bus demand will increase. And in freight, the demand for road freight will increase by 8 times, but rail freight only increases by 4 times. So this shows that the demand for road freight is much higher than rail freight, but rail is more sustainable. Rail and waterways is more sustainable than road. So you should shift towards road freight. So these are a lot of numbers, so forgive me if it's confusing. But so what we did is we tried to develop different strategies and actually see how much emissions can be reduced. So look at the numbers and see what can India achieve if you implement all this, right? So first you look at fuel efficiency standards. So this is the first strategy in the long-term plan that India has. So in the low ambition case, we are assuming that there are no standards for three-wheelers, two-wheelers, and there is no standard for freight, right? Freight, like light-duty freight. So if that is the case, India can only achieve 8% emission reduction by 2050. But if you look at the high ambition scenario, if India actually develops more stringent fuel economy standards for three-wheelers, two-wheelers, and freight, this can go up to 33% by 2050. So you can clearly see the role played by fuel economy and how that will increase the emission reduction in the long run. And for example, as per the CAFE norms, India should aim for 113 grams of CO2 per kilometer, but right now it's around 121 grams, right? And in the European standard, it's equal to 98 grams, but we are nowhere reaching the Euro 6 standard. So BS 6 is not even like as stringent as the Euro 6. So India should try and focus on that. And the second is transitioning to cleaner fuels. So what we see is in the low ambition scenario, so this tool also looks at, similar to electric vehicle sales mandate, what if India has a hydrogen sales mandate in the future? It's a possibility, right? Similar to FAME, we can have a hydrogen vehicle sales mandate. So if in the low ambition, we are not including that, and we see that India can achieve 23% emission reduction by 2050. That is, if you focus on electrifying all the fleets. And we are assuming that rail is 100% electrified, because Indian Railways is rapidly electrifying its fleet right now. And they already achieved 85% electric fleet. And in the high ambition scenario, we are assuming some percent of new vehicles is hydrogen. So like the previous session, assuming that the cost for hydrogen reduces, green hydrogen reduces, and India builds its electrolyzer manufacturing, the cost of renewables reduces. So assuming all that, suppose we say that hydrogen, 25% of freight and freight and passenger rail is hydrogen vehicles, plus 15% of bus is hydrogen vehicles, then it can achieve nearly 60% of emission reduction. So you see the role played by hydrogen in addition to electric. You see how drastically it's increasing from 20% to 60% emission reduction. So you can see the impact of all your policies in the final emissions. So what I would like to point out is, this does not include just vehicle sales, right? You should also look at the electricity coming from renewables. So we also included that. So this emission reduction is achievable only if 75% of energy comes from renewables. Otherwise, you can't achieve this. So I also looked at, if it becomes 40% instead of 75%, it will reduce to, the final emissions will reduce from 60 to 40%. So you can see the impact of renewable energy along with electric vehicles, right? And also you should look at charging infrastructure. So what we have also modeled is, we are assuming that in this scenario, by 2050, every 1,000 people should have 60 charging stations, which is still less, but that is the assumption that we are taking. But India is not even reaching, it's very nascent right now. So only if all the infrastructure plus renewable energy and other variables, like also reducing the concern. So major concern right now is a range concern, right, for electric vehicles. So assuming that is completely eliminated by 2050, only if all that is achieved, that in addition to this can give you emission reduction. And finally, shifting towards low carbon modes, right? So first, in the first scenario, we're only assuming we are shifting private vehicles to public vehicles, but we are not doing anything for freight. We are still promoting road freight. So that gives you 5% reduction. But in the high ambition, we are assuming that 40% of freight moves from road to rail. So this gives you nearly like 20 to 30% reduction. So you can see the importance of tackling freight, like moving freight from road to rail. So you can see how it increases the emission reduction. So yeah, and so we also, what we saw was individual strategies, right? So how should India move forward? They should not focus on just one or two of the strategies. They should focus on all three together. So what we did is, suppose we only combined two strategies. So in the first case, we're only focusing on clean fuel, low ambition of clean fuel. And we're only focusing on high ambition of modal shift, right? Only those two strategies. It can achieve 25% overall emission reductions from transport on the whole, like for the entire sector. But suppose, and now here 50%, suppose we are combining clean fuels and modal shift. And in another case, we're only having clean fuels, but higher, like very high targets for clean fuels, it will achieve 50%. But if we are combining all three, if India decides to include strategies for fuel economy, cleaner fuels and mode shift, together you can achieve 75% reduction by 2050 from the entire transport sector. So here you can see how all these strategies should be a combination. It shouldn't be implemented in individual. So basically you saw how cumulatively you should look at all fuel efficiency, low carbon fuels and mode shift, right? So similarly, we did a analysis at the city level. So that is at the national level, but this is at the city level. So if you look at emission reductions from cities, the highest potential for emission reduction comes from, again, passenger mode shift. So 60% comes from shifting passenger demand from cars to buses and maybe metro and everything. And next 16% comes from fuel vehicle switch, shifting towards electric buses, electric cars. So focusing on some city level actions, and then it comes from fuel efficiency, and transit oriented development is another important aspect that cities should focus on. So we also, one last thing I want to say is, when you look at all these roadmap for decarbonization, you should make sure all the actions are inclusive in nature. So for example, if you're looking at electric vehicles, make sure that there is like easy loans available for informal settlements, informal groups. If you're looking at pedestrian infrastructure, make sure that it's accessible to disabled. It looks at women, like you also look at women's safety in buses, things like that. So that is something also that we focus on. So yeah, thanks a lot. That's